Hello and welcome back to Lower League Lingo, the only show on this channel that's actually had a break over the course of the pre-season. It's been wonderful, but we're ready to get back in it. The WNL and the regional leagues kick off again this weekend. We're excited and we're going to have a little chat about it after this. Yes, welcome back to Lower League Lingo. We have two people that you will recognise instantly on this channel, and one that you may have recognised from popping on across the All 4 brand. And we'll say hello to him first. Nick from the Wolves Women podcast. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very well, mate. Yourself?
Loving life. Always pleased when we get the chance to sit around and talk women's football. So that is good. And Gaza, nice to see you back from the other side of the world. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I mean, it's I had a lovely week away. By chance, stumbled upon the Gotham game, which you happen to be watching. So that was a lovely coincidence. And killed a couple of hours before I got to the airport. Not quite as much as the red card killed the game, but yeah, it was something to do whilst I waited before I had to get to the airport to fly home. So yeah, glad to be back. Less glad to be back in work next week, but this is the way things go.
It is indeed. It's cyclical, as we well know in education. But nonetheless, here we are. Let's hello to the people in the chat. Jonathan, lovely to see you here. And Claire too, lovely to see you as well. Do get involved as we talk all things WNL. Really, this evening, we're going to be talking about the Where Our Game Grows strategy that the WNL have released today, which will take place over 2025 and to 2028. It's a nice 3-year strategy they've got there. We're going to be talking about the changes to the WNL Cup and Plate. We're going to talk a little bit about the FA Cup and whether or not the prize money is actually going to help these sides in WNL and regional leagues as they travel through it. And if I remember, which I'm hoping we will, we'll even talk a little bit about the fact we've got playoffs. But before we kick off with all of that, it's nice that we've got Nick from the Wolves Women podcast. And we ended last season really on quite a sour note, talking about a few clubs that really seem to have let their women down. And Wolves, unfortunately, were one of them because they had basically said we hadn't even applied for promotion. So had they managed to nick it at the death, they wouldn't have gone up, which would have just been a travesty of justice. So, Nick, we wanted to give you the floor to see if you could give us a bit of an update. How have things changed over the course of the post and pre-season? Do you feel a bit more confident going into this year? Do you know whether or not they've applied for promotion? Should it happen this year? Where do we stand with Wolves now?
Thank you, mate. Back end of last season was a bit of a down, especially after we'd had a great sort of final run in. Going into the last game of the season, wanting your nearest and dearest rivals to cause a bit of an upset was a bit of a strange feeling. Usually we want them to get spanked, but there we go. So it was a bit of a sour one to end on. Going into, on the back of that, there was obviously a lot of negative publicity around Wolves and their treatment. I think I suddenly became every journalist's best friend. Certainly, the number of people who were messaging me and shows I was on, I became a bit of media lady of the night, shall we say? So it caused a bit of a backlash around the club. Having Sky camped outside the training ground discussing it isn't best look for a club. The chief operating officer, chief executive officer of the club, and senior management did agree that they had messed up, and released statements publicly assuring us that to come this coming season, and subsequently, if Wolves are in a position where we should be applying, we will apply. That they've stated that they have increased the funding for the women's team. We'll see how much by when the next set of accounts are, or the set of accounts that cover this coming season come out, we will see, or we are seeing more players signed on part-time contracts. So we had 3 last season. We've now got 4, 5 on contracts. And some of those are new players as well, different players coming in. So that's really positive. We have seen us sign 5 top quality players as at time of recording. So that's Amy Sims and Lindsay Harkin from Forest. So we poached Notts Forest club captain off them, and Amy Sims, who was one of the top players in the Tier 3 last few seasons. And from Burnley, we've signed Georgia Marshall, Anna Gray, and we've also signed Luann Worsley, who was on loan at Burnley, so on loan at Burnley from Blues. So she's Midland lass. So that's 5 really top quality signings, and we've appointed an advisory board who will support all things around the women's team, sort of lean into the club as a whole, and sort of press and push for all things, development of the women's team. So that's going to be chaired by Jenny Wilkes. So those in the West Midlands will know Jenny. She's been around Wolves women since 1999, if I remember rightly, but she's BCWM as well in previous guys as well. So well-known voice. But also it's going to be joined by Anna Price, who until recently was club captain and is our record appearance holder. Claire Hakeman, another former player who is works for the club in the academy and women's side of things, but on that operational side of things. And then also Carrie Davis, who's BBC head of communications and a Wolves Foundation trustee, and also Lindsay Hooper, who many of you will know from Sky Sports and the Offside Pod. So some really good sort of bastions and good champions of women's football as a whole, and got a lot of experience there. So in the end, I think it was one of those things with hindsight, we'll look back at it as, whilst it was the wrong decision, it has been beneficial to the club as a whole and pushed us forward, which if it hadn't come out and it hadn't sort of happened, we wouldn't necessarily have got to this position now. Pre-season, we're well under, we've obviously completed pre-season. Publicly, we've only played 3 games. I know we've played a few more behind closed doors. And sort of that's been against some really good opposition as well. So behind closed doors, we've played Leafield and Blues. And publicly, we've played Plymouth. So Tier 3 Southern, good opposition. And they've got a good manager and pushing forward from where they were last season. We played Ipswich, who are obviously now WSL2. And we played Exeter this weekend, just gone, who are obviously top end of Tier 3 South. So really good challenges for us. And bar the Exeter game, which we sadly lost, but it was a real humdinger. 4-3 finish that one was. But bar the rest of them, we won all of them, including beating Blues, which is we hate to mention it occasionally, beating Blues. And I think, as Claire says, they are trying to make amends. I always said, and we has always said, that actions speak louder than words. So there's still a few things that need to be sort of delivered. So they assured us there will be a full-time commercial officer for the club, which is huge, to be self-sustaining, which obviously links into the strategy, which we'll talk about later. And they're advertising and recruiting for a media officer who will be focused predominantly around the women's side of things, which certainly over the close season hasn't been at its best. But I think that's partially because the media team is stretched without having this role that's dedicated to them to take that on. But again, it's actions speak louder than words, so we'll wait and see. We'll come around to February. If I was the club, I would be making a big statement in February that you've made the application, regardless of whether we're actually in that position. I'd do it. Just put the paperwork in, make a big statement, makes it really clear you've demonstrated your commitment. And I think that's key. Yeah. My next concern is if we do go up, is how much backing will Maka and the team get, because going full time, or you get into the Championship WSL2, you've got to go full time, and therefore that's key. And that's you've got to put the money in. So as I said, actions speak louder than words. Action so far being positive. Pre-season vibe, all positive. But we go into Sunday, tough game away to Liverpool Feds. Liverpool Feds' last game at Jericho Lane. So I think this season's going to be no pushover. We've got a tough challenge ahead. We've just got to take it one game at a time and keep winning.
For sure, and hopefully everything you've outlined there happens, and we see the commitment being given to Wolves and to lots of teams across the pyramid. And Claire, of course, has popped in and said she's a big Fulham women's fan. Can't wait for the season to start. Obviously, they did incredibly well in the London and South East Regional, just around the corner from where I am. Absolutely mullered that league in the end. Just smashed them, to be fair. And they will be in Division 1 South East. But another team that, can we say they smashed the league? I suppose they did pretty well. I don't know if smashed would quite be the one. It was a tight for a while. But it was, of course, Wythenshawe, which is where Gareth joins us from. His team are indeed in the Division 1 North as well. So we've got stakeholders from all across the country here in the WNL, and it's probably about time that we move into the strategy. And it's a big strategy that they've announced. It was beautiful, the fact they did it today. Lovely when the WNL helps you out with your content, because they've thrown it straight out there, and it's obviously building on their previous strategy, which they called Empowering for Success. And they claim that has helped contribute to a 100% increase in average match attendances since 2021, which is quite good. It's seen the introduction of minimum standards across the league, which is good. But of course, now they need to build on those things that they have done. And they've called it championing growth, elevating performance, and building identity. So there are 4 spaces within which they are trying to grow, 4 key strategic priorities. And they are the environment, the people, the impact, and the commercial. And through that, there are also 5 threads which go through each of those priorities, which is basically diversity and inclusion, facilities, female health and well-being, safeguarding, and technology and data. So that's the, in effect, boring sort of la-di-da stuff that we are forced really to talk about when it comes to these sorts of things. But I think it's important also to recognise, and I don't know what you guys think, that actually the WNL are trying very hard to make it better. And I do feel a bit sorry for them. We talk a lot about the FA and all of these sorts of things, but it was the WNL that had actually come up first of all with a strategy, something that they wanted to do to change the way the Women's Football League is. And it was a massive one. It went all the way through Tier 3 to the regional leagues in Tier 6. It was a massive idea that they came up with. And it was just completely executed effectively by, first of all, poor planning in terms of clubs not really wanting the academy teams in there, but also by the fact that there was no communication with the WSL and WSL2. And because of that, they didn't know what they were going to do. The WSL decides they're going to go to 14 teams, and then that instantly has an impact on every other league below. So when we start talking about these sorts of things, we need to consider it under that umbrella. But Gareth, initially they talk about these 4 things. We're going to talk about them individually, and we'll kick off with the environment. They say that they want to look at what's going on the environment on the pitch and off the pitch. They want to propel club standards, and they want to ensure that they protect and enhance a positive culture and a positive behaviours and enhance league delivery. It certainly sounds like that's something they want to do, and we've seen that through the way in which they've gone forward. But I think the key one that kicks out for me there is propelling standards, because there are so many clubs that just end up having to give up, can't maintain their team anymore. When we talk about environment, do you think that's really what we're talking about here? Trying to give the women the opportunity within their clubs to actually play football all year round and not be at the mercy of the money men or the men's side or just greedy landowners.
I think ultimately what the purpose is the previous 3 years, the WNL have introduced what they've called their minimum standards, which are these set of there's several different criteria within there that all clubs in the league need to be aspiring towards. There are 10 standards which are what they call safe to operate, where everybody has to have those in order to be able to operate within the league. And then there are several more that teams should be aiming towards or kind of should be working to create these things. And they include things like exit procedures for players that leave. They include things like minimum amount of contact time for certain clubs. It's the contact time at tier 3 is a lot more than it is at tier 4, which is a lot more than it was at tier 5. So there've been things like also AEDs. They have to be at the pitch side for games and for training, and there's kind of all of these things that they've thread throughout. So this to me reads as a kind of building upon those minimum standards which already exist. I think what they want to do as well is level up tier 3 and try and make it not the standard necessarily on the pitch is the same as tier 4. Tier 4 living up to tier 3, because there is a massive disparity in terms of what clubs can achieve between those two. The resources that we will have at Wythenshawe, for example, will be vastly different to the resources that Wolves have, for example, at the moment. But there's things in there like they talk about technology, and one of the things that is new this year at tier 4, which I believe was in at tier 3 last season, is uploading footage to a central platform to be able to help with it. Helps with things like highlights, particularly if you've already got the footage there, but also helps with analysis and can help to level up clubs in that sense as well. One of the things they mentioned in the strategy is female health and well-being minimum standards, and one of the things that has been pushed regularly throughout this pre-season has been courses to do with female health and well-being, and there should be I think what they're saying is 2 people at the club that have done this course in order to be kind of aware and clued up and being on board with all of that. So the talk about standards and environment feels like a continuation of the work that has been done already, looking to kind of professionalize workforces. I think one of the things that they talk about at the moment for tier 3 are things like analysts and requiring strength and conditioning coaches. Or they're not necessarily required at tier 4, but are at tier 3. So I think it's about helping clubs as they make that progression through the pyramid to be able to compete at that level and be able to continue to progress. Because if we had come up now and we'd not kind of added in some of these things that the minimum standards are requiring of us, then we very well may be left behind some of those other clubs that are there as well. So yeah, to me, it feels very much like a continuation. Environment as well, also meaning like the culture and the atmosphere and things at the club. And I think the exit process is a big part of that. So they want like safer recruitment processing in terms of coaches. But yeah, one thing we didn't have last season, but we're working on now, is that exit process. So if a player leaves, then it's about figuring out kind of why that is and putting a process in place so that players are able to give feedback and be able to respond to various different things at the club in kind of an open and professional way. So sometimes players leave because then just not getting the minutes that they want, or they want new challenges, or travel gets a lot. And there's lots and lots of perfectly legitimate, simple reasons why players leave a club. But that's not always the case, as we know. Blackburn this year have an entirely new squad. We know why that is. So, some of those things there will be slightly different. So, I think this particular part is is welcome. It's good. You want that atmosphere where people want to play at the club. They want to play for the team. They want to play. Coaches want to come there and coach, because that is all part of helping people to progress. I don't know what Blackburn's recruitment has been like this summer, but I can't imagine it's been particularly easy for them. And that will be because people look at it from the outside and think that that's a tricky environment to be in for. So yeah, I think this is all just gonna help teams.
I agree completely with what you're saying there, Gareth. I think it is a huge build on what's been done over the last few years, and raising the standards. I know, taking Wolves as the example, part of the reason why we don't play in Wolverhampton is because there isn't a ground that meets the standards, and that people sort of talk about, oh, can we not be at the what was called CKW Stadium at Castlecroft, and it's Telford's Sears Stadium, must call it by the right name. Sears Stadium is so much better than that as a facility for the players, and that's part of raising those standards. I think what's also interesting in this, and it sort of ties into sort of things that haven't necessarily happened in the FA Women's National League, but I look at those sorts of the positive culture, etc., about the guidelines and codes of conduct, and some of it is there already, but it's reinforcing things so we don't have a Maddie Cusack in the Women's National League. We don't lose a player from those sorts of circumstances. And I think that's hugely important. I think that's been really, you see that being sort of not said in so many words, but sort of indicated by some of the words that's said there. And the other thing I pick up in this is a couple of things as well, is the minimum the governance standards, so we don't have a Hull situation. But also there about the culture, etc., is that I think we've seen previously, or we know of clubs where the managers are, how should I phrase this, domineering personalities on the sidelines. That's the polite way. You can pick and choose who I'm talking about, but yeah, their culture that is not necessarily appropriate, that needs to be sort of managed out of the game, full stop, not just in women's football, but across the board. I wouldn't have them managing an under sevens team, let alone a group of adults. So yeah, I think it's a really good step forward. I think my one concern is the support the clubs are going to get. We know, and I'll take Wythenshawe as the example, but please correct me, Gareth, if I'm wrong. But Wythenshawe is run by volunteers, and they've got limited time to develop some of these policies and put them into place. It's somebody giving up an evening of their week to go away and write that policy, get it reviewed by somebody, get it rewritten and updated and approved, etc. I would hope that the FA are producing templates of some description that therefore clubs can take and go for it. So go on, Gareth.
Yeah, so with a lot of them, there are templates and things available, or examples from other clubs. So I was kind of updating some policies and stuff this season, and there were some really good templates that were available for us that we could kind of look at, tweak, adapt, make relevant to our own setting. I've seen in the chat as well that Claire's talking about things costing money. Particularly with the footage, lots of clubs already have VO cameras anyway and record it for their own analysis. It's just about uploading it to a central place. But for lots of things, for example, we have one AED at the moment. So we've got it. We're kind of safe to operate, but there are grants and things available as well. So we're going to be using some of the grants that become available to be able to apply to do certain things. So clubs will be able to tap into that for courses. If they've got coaches that don't necessarily meet what the WNL want, then you can tap into the grant to do that. You can tap into the grant for things to do with light VO cameras or AEDs or kind of all of those kinds of things. There is a pot of money available that clubs can put applications in. I think there's 2 phases throughout the season that clubs can apply for. So there is investment. One thing I have noticed with this strategy as well is it's mentioned quite a few times throughout it that this is funded by the Premier League. So yeah, it's on the front and back cover of the actual document that this is Premier League funding. So I think it is you're right. I think we do need to see some of that funding trickle down. And I think this is the start of that.
Mouth there, Gazza. So I was going to tell everybody that it was the Premier League just then, but I was also going to, because I'm quite nice like this, I found it. I had it on my phone, but now we have got it just here. So we can actually have it alongside us at the same time, so everybody can see what it is that we are talking about, because the strategy, of course, was, as we said, released online so that everybody could see. And the measure of success, as we said, for environment there, as you've all mentioned, 100% of clubs, that's everybody who's not sure of their maths, to meet minimum standards as the league continues to evolve and professionalise. And again, these are the bits that they were talking about. There's the stadium accreditation standards, the technology solutions that Gareth was talking about there. And I think that can be really quite helpful, but solid governance structures, as Nick brought up there as well. So all of the things that the boys have mentioned here, incredibly good. Protecting and enhancing that positive culture and behaviour. Nick speaking about how the coaches interact with the squad, but also amongst each other. They're talking about collaboration between clubs. They might share best practice or connect with each other, and that is the difference, I think, in some ways about the women's game. Of course, there's that competition. Of course, you want to do better than the teams around you, but also you want to grow the game, and that is absolutely vital. And of course, the last thing there being the league delivery, as we just mentioned, safeguarding support, those sorts of things, high quality events to improve learning and best practice. So everything you guys have just mentioned there, incredibly good. So we'll move on to the next bit, because Nick spoke about volunteers at Withenshaw, and that's what Gareth was talking about there. When they're talking about the people, the measure of success they've put here is increasing the percentage of players, referees, coaches, and club workforce each year who then also need to feel supported within the league. And, to me, this is a really difficult one, because we have sat here many times as a group of analysts, pundits, lads just sitting around talking about it, and the ladies too when they come on, and we are often less than impressed, shall we say, with the standard of refereeing. And that, to be fair, goes all the way up to WSL level. It's by no means something that is just exclusive to the lower leagues.
Barry, so, just dive in on that. So just interrupt you and go for it on this one. I found out over the last couple of days that that there are not going to be observers of match officials at Women's National League games this coming season. So last season, every single game had an observer at it to see how the refs were performing, or an assistant refs were performing or not, and therefore can provide them with support advice about, accordingly. And apologies if I'm preaching to the converted on this one. Certainly the level we're talking about, every club at the end of the game will score the ref out of 100. Anything at 60 or below will require the club to put in a report on that ref. Okay, so that's what every club does. I do it as a coach of an under-12s team. Certainly up to the National League Tier 3, they'll do it. I don't know what they do in more professional situations, but they'll do something similar. Then on top of that, there was the observers. This season coming, they're scrapping the observers. They're going to have spot checks on where refs are coming up for promotion. So therefore, if Joe Bloggs is having some really good scores and we think they might be able to go up and do the line in WSL2, they'll go and watch them ref and see how they do. But otherwise, they won't ref. They won't go and observe the refs. This means that unless clubs are going to put themselves through the ball ache of putting in complaints every time there's poor refereeing standards, score ref at 60 or below, that refereeing standards will not progress with the rest of the game. The game is investing and growing so rapidly, the refs are being left behind. This is not a criticism of refs, by the way. This is a criticism of the support given to refs. Okay, they are being left behind while the rest of the game grows, and this is really poor that that the refs are not going to be supported, because all that will happen is as fans will go onto our channels, we'll go onto our social media, we'll moan about the refs, and there will be a negative situation around the refs, like we see in the men's game, rather than actually giving them the support to help them develop. We should be pushing. We should be really pushing. And I agree, Claire, that the refs are trailing far behind. We need to push them forward. We need to have that support. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see. And it's a question I would like to ask the FA on this is their scoring, because obviously they'll see the scores from last season. Were they down on the season before? And what will be what's the cut-off point? What's the point where they're actually going to really step in and really support the refs and progress them? Because I think this is good words here on the refs. If you go page 17, Barry, sorry, it is really good wording. They talk about that, but they need to really actually follow it up on that in the strategy. Sorry, I got on my hobby horse there because it frustrates me when we don't support the refs.
No, it's understandable. I'll be intrigued to see what Gareth thinks actually about this as well, because again, they're talking about how they're going to help all of these different sections within the clubs. But the referees, to me, is the big one. The people that work at the club because they love the club. There's nobody is getting paid that much money within women's football that they're like, oh, this is going to be my full-time job and I love it, not at lower league level. So the club workforce is there because it cares, and ditto for the coaches, and the players just want to be the best that they can be. But then they might also have very different levels of ambition. Some of them might just want to be doing something on a Sunday. Some of them want to take it a bit more serious. Some of them are aiming to try and get to the WSL. But the referees, they're so important. And Gareth, I just wonder if part of the issue is, because we've had to do it before, we've had to complain about the standard of refereeing. And when you do that and you put something in below a 60, nothing really changes. You put something in there. And I think the drama that you get from the rate and amount of 100 is, we all know it. If you've had a game and one team has won and the other team hasn't, the team that hasn't is probably the one that's going to go, well, let's put 59 in and we'll put a complaint in about them. The team that's won will probably just go, I'll give them 65, 70, doesn't matter. Why give myself more work to do? So unless you have a united front between both of the clubs agreeing that actually this wasn't acceptable for this level of football, it's not really going to happen. It just comes across as sort of sour grapes. Is that the same up in the north of England, far beyond Watford Gap?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've had occasions before where we've kind of spoken to opposition teams afterwards, and where referees have had, where we felt like the bad decisions happen, decisions that we think are the wrong way happen. It is what it is. It's where there's inconsistency that I think is the issue for me. If a referee is consistently blowing for absolutely everything for both teams, then you can just pass up as one of those things that just happens. But where things are constantly being let go, or where there's like someone's mentioned kind of an endangerment to players and things, that's kind of where it becomes a problem. And we've said before to opposition, like, we're going to put it in at this, we're going to put a report in, and they've said, okay, yeah, fine, we'll do the same. I personally think that the rating system doesn't work, because for me, if someone says something is 6 out of 10, for me that's fine. It's not spectacular, but it's fine. And so I think good referees all get given sort of really high marks, and then bad referees kind of, if you think like a referee was like whatever, they weren't great, but there wasn't any massive issues, then I think a 6 out of 10 is perfectly acceptable mark. So I don't know. I feel like if you rate them 60 out of 100, that doesn't, in my head, equally think that's so bad I need to write a report about it, because you just essentially cut off the bottom. Like, what does it mean then? For before, you're essentially rating them out of like 41, really, because if you rate it as a 59, well, then it may as well be a 40 or a 30. I also think that lots of clubs will just rate referees 61 because they want it noted that they weren't good, but don't want to have to write the report because it feels as though if you take the time and effort to write this report, then first of all, when you try and put it onto full time, which is what the regional leagues have to do, the box you get given to explain anything is really short. So end up being really, really brief, and that's not helpful to anybody.
No.
I don't know. The National League use a different system. I assume that's different.
But wouldn't it be
also
easier to have a set standard of things that you need to rate them against? So, for example, the first thing,
there are three things.
It's a bit vague, isn't it? So wouldn't it be easier to sort of say, like, first of all, did they turn up in the right kit? I mean, we had one bloke who once turned up. He wouldn't get into the correct boots, and he was just running around in his body warmer and a hat. I mean, he looked like he was walking his dog afterwards. There was absolutely no desire to look like a referee at all. But, you know, that sort of thing, were they able to control the game, decision making, you know, to give it a simple sort of out of 10 for those things, because most referees are pretty good on the whole. It's just a particular thing that's let them down. Could be, like I say, the control of the players, control of the game. Could be their decision making. They didn't feel they were very consistent. You know, would that help to narrow it down a bit? So at least then they're getting better feedback?
I think so. I think at the moment there's 3 different regions. Excuse me. So they get an overall rating. Like their overall kind of control of the game is 40. And then there's 30 for judgment of major decisions. And then 30, I think, for control of the game. So it's a bit more split up than it used to be. But I think you're right. I think for me, a major part of the referee, you can tell before the game kicks off what kind of referee it's going to be. You can tell based on how they've arrived. Like you said, we've had people before where they've turned up in a hoodie and the refereed in a hoodie and a pair of tracksuit bottoms. And you kind of think straight away, as soon as they walk through the door, oh, this is the kind of referee that this is. So I think that the kind of presentation, how they speak to you at the start, I think sometimes you get referees that are really officious and will introduce themselves and will kind of chat through their expectations, but don't feel condescending. Whereas you get some referees that come and speak to you before the game and will come across kind of really condescending. And I think, yeah, I think ultimately what the issue is that nobody wants to be a referee. And so people start becoming referees, and because of a shortage of referees, people are moved through before they've had a chance to properly develop. So they end up officiating at a higher level than maybe their experience would suggest that they should be. And then the game's a bit quicker, it's a bit feistier, it means a bit more. All this kind of stuff happens, and people feel a little bit maybe out of their depth. And so the ratings are pretty low, and the standard of refereeing is lower, but there's not really anything we can do because we need these referees to be in these leagues. And so we're kind of left with this vicious circle. I know from umpiring cricket, which I've not done this season, but previously, that I enjoyed it, but when I got home after 7 hours of umpiring cricket, if I felt like that I'd just been given stick from a team all afternoon, I didn't really want to do it. And and then I would umpire games that were of a higher standard, and the game would be a bit quicker, and I would kind of get myself like, maybe my positioning wouldn't be quite right, and I wouldn't be in the best place to make a decision. And so I would then start doubting myself, and then I'd be in my own head, like, did I get that decision right? And I'm not thinking about the next delivery, I'm thinking about the last one. And so then I'm not in the best position to get that one right. And I think we're in a similar position now with football where, yes, not enough people want to referee. The referees that do referee do, but it's not from the outside to a large group of people an attractive thing to do. I think it is becoming more so, but I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't want to go and run around for 90 minutes, be the kind of target for, it's not just the 22 players on the pitch, and then you've got 7 sets of subs on each side, so that's another 14, and 6 coaches in each dugout. There's another 12, and all the fans around. Nobody there. The only other people there that are essentially on your team are your assistants and your 4th official if you've got one. So I feel like it's quite a lonely place, and so we need that support for referees. And I think having an observer there at every game is a double-edged sword. From when I was observed doing cricket, you kind of stand there and there were times where I was overthinking things a little bit because I know that someone's watching what I'm doing. But then after the game, when you sit down, you go through the feedback from everything that you've done, and you think, I did do that. Like I did notice that, and I did pick that up, and I'm aware that that's something I need to do differently. But then also you get positive feedback from the observers as well, and then that's reassuring that actually, maybe I got that one main decision wrong, but then there were hundreds of other decisions in the game that I got right. So yes, maybe I gave that penalty when there was simulation, or didn't give a penalty that was clear, but I got this decision right and this decision right, and this yellow card I was correct to give. So I think support for referees is hugely important, because without proper support, the standard's never going to increase, and then we're also going to have fewer referees, and we'll be stuck in this kind of vicious circle.
I think the other thing is
soccer. Throw somebody out there so they don't know that they're going to get an observer, and then when the feedback comes back, it's anonymous, so they're not knowing they're being observed, and it's a bit more random. I don't know, but I do want to come to you, Nick, but I just want to move the conversation along ever so slightly. Otherwise, we'll still be here at 11 o'clock and still not have mentioned the word playoffs, which would not be a great thing. But Jonathan has mentioned this part here, and actually the next bit talks about safe, welcoming and inclusive experiences for all individuals across the WNL. It talks a bit about the facilities there as well. But I mean, feel free to finish off whatever it was you were going to say. But then also with regards to what Jonathan says here about the Rainbow Laces withdrawal from the FA and its own inclusion program, how do you think that's going to work within this? And of course, with the fact there's been a lot going on in terms of women's football. We've had the High Court judgments and all sorts of things. There's a lot going on there. How can the WNL implement this the way that they would like to?
All I was going to say on the rest, just to wrap up that, which was my point, was I think us as pundits or podcasters, or whatever you want to describe yourself, is when we see a good ref, we need to sing their praises as well. And I think I think a lot of the criticism of the refs comes from people who don't understand the laws of the game. I think first thing I notice is if someone talks about the rules in football, they don't know what they're talking about. They're laws of association football. So therefore, that's first and foremost. And I think that's key. And that's why I always talk. I've got a friendly ref who I always ask these things and run them past them, because it always helps educate me. With regard to sort of Jonathan's point around the inclusion, the rainbow laces, and I think we saw it as well at the end of the Euros with the disgusting abuse of Jess Carter, the racism there, and the not taking the knee. I think there is a huge amount to do. I think certainly, I think Tier 3 has had trans players playing in it, but there are very few trans players in association football, or were before the rules changed. And I think let's be honest, no one's going into having a transition to go and try and win the WSL title. And I think that's a key thing to note. I think I was proud that Leah Williamson wore the rainbow armband all through the Euros, and I think whilst it is optional, I think it's always preferential. I think to demonstrate that support, women's football is far more inclusive of the LGBTQ community, and I think it should remain that. And I say that as an ally rather than somebody of that community. I think there's going to be far more players wearing the hijab, etc. As well, we see that in this, which obviously is not quite as prominent within the men's game, and I think that should be welcome. I think one of the things your friend of mine, Mr. Foster, will note is a couple of seasons ago we had Wolves had a player called Layla Banaras who's now just joined Lewes. She broke her fast on the pitch, and that was really welcoming to see. So Wolves had just happened to score. The ref held up the game while she could have energy supplement and food, so she could break her fast on the pitch, and then the game carried on. That was supported by both sets of both teams. I think that's a huge welcome. Society at the moment is not necessarily in a place where everyone is welcome, and I think that's not necessarily, that's not a positive thing. Not necessarily. That is not a positive thing. I
agree.
We need this to be more welcoming. Go for it, mate.
Picture that you see there, obviously we can see a lady there with full body coverings, and there was a big hoo-ha as well about somebody being told they can't wear the hijab whilst they're playing their football, and it's good to see that this is now very clearly something that they can do. So I think that they're clearly trying to make it a little bit more welcoming and easier for people to access, because let's be honest, it doesn't necessarily have the pull to be excluding people at the moment. Moving on just a tiny bit then. So looking at
impact.
Sorry,
can I just for 2 seconds, very quickly.
Next, but I'm going to get you to do exactly what Nick just did, which is to finish off what you want to say about that and lead you into the next question as well. To do that, because the next question is about this. 45% of women's football fans to have an awareness of the WNL, and I think it was a big question for me, because obviously I do want you to talk about what you were just talking about in terms of the inclusion, but we need to start getting more people with their eyes on this, and you spoke about highlights, these sorts of things as well. When we look at this, we're one of the few channels around around England that are trying to champion what's going on in the lower leagues, things below tier 3. You see a fair bit about WSL, a fair bit about WSL2. They're talking about getting 45% awareness. Does it need more? Does it need more from aggregators and from people outside of the WNL to start pushing it a bit more and making it a bit more obvious for people to see? So again, by all means, finish off the other question, but then lead on to that one.
Yeah, so just very briefly, based on kind of the last thing, I think the proof is going to be in the pudding, really, as to what the FA actually go and do. I think there is always a risk with things like taking the knee and rainbow laces that it just becomes something that happens. So players will take a knee before the game, and then the whistle will go, and that's it. It's happened, and it kind of just becomes this gesture with no real meaning behind it anymore. Rainbow laces was fantastic when it first came in, but now football boots are so vastly different that some boots don't have laces, others have kind of weird kind of lacings and stuff, and from when I've had them before, because I've had them sent to me, they feel really thick. The players don't necessarily like them because they just don't feel, they don't work necessarily with the way the boots are designed anymore. And it was kind of this thing where you would have them, and then the next game it would be fine, you'd move on. And I think for inclusion and EDI to really work and for everyone to feel like they're welcome in a space, it needs to be more than one weekend. So Rainbow Laces weekend is fantastic, but if it's only that one weekend, then what's the point? And taking of the knee is great, but then if people are still racially abusing defenders, then all of that has kind of lost all meaning. So I think that if the WNL kind of come up with a kind of really comprehensive strategy and formula for making women's football a welcoming space, and I think typically compared to men's football, it is. It just needs to stay that way as the game grows. And I think it will very much depend on what this strategy actually looks like. Thinking about impact, I think 45%. Bear in mind, this is a strategy for 3 years. So this is 45% of women's football fans in 2028 will have knowledge. I think I would much rather see something that you look at and think, oh, okay, that feels like a weird choice. Why not 50%? But 45% by them will still be massive growth. I think one of the major things that's going to have a big impact on this is the Women's FA Cup this season is televised from the first round. So it may only be one game in the round that's televised. And, from a selfish perspective, fingers crossed that we get a really attractive draw in that round. If we get there, we've got to win the third qualifying round first. But that'll be huge for those two clubs. Whoever those two clubs are in the first round that are going to be on TV, that TNT Sports are going to come there, present something, even if only a very small amount of people watch it and then much greater numbers of people consume it on the highlights package later, having a massive company like TNT pushing a big competition like the Women's FA Cup is going to be huge. And I think it's going to be these kinds of things. It's one of the things that they actually mention on the next page is leveraging the FA Cup and using the FA Cup to build awareness and kind of looking at some of those other ways in which we can use audiences and showcase audiences. And I think that I know in the past when I was in the regional leagues, we had workshops and things about how we can use social media to help kind of create a brand for your clubs. I think using things like that particularly will be massive. I think the WNL using their channels to showcase clubs and things will be huge as well. I think the risk potentially then ends up you only get a certain amount of clubs that get kind of pushed and showcased. I think the Manager of the Month awards are fantastic because I have absolutely no idea how they come up with the 4 managers that are nominated. However, there is always discussion underneath because there is always somebody that you feel could get nominated that didn't. And so it creates this discussion underneath. And maybe that's deliberate. I don't know. Tin hat scenario there. But I think there are lots of things that the WNL are trying to do to kind of create this narrative and build this following using their social channels. And I think the WNL, and sorry, I think the Euros win will hopefully really help with that. And I think, I think the biggest thing could be a WNL club getting a massive draw in the 4th round. Let's say Arsenal, for example, get drawn away against WNL club. They got Leeds United a few years ago. If that ends up then on TV, then that's a huge thing, and there's attention then on Leeds, there's attention on the rest of the Division 1 North, and it becomes this much bigger thing. So I think using the FA Cup is a really, really good idea.
Can I just come in there, Matt? Just quickly on that, because obviously Wolves got Man United last season, and I think Wolves didn't do enough to build on that appearance. And I think, personally, it's got to be at home. You don't want to go away. You don't want to go to Leeds Sports Village or Boreham, whatever. You want it home because that brings your fans in and gets your connection. But I think it's that support that the league needs to give to clubs of how to build on that. Realistically, is right. You've got Man United coming to the new Bucks Head. This is some of the things you need to think about not in the run-up to the game. It's that right immediately, week after that day after that game, what you need to do then with the data you will have got. Wolves should have been bombarding every single person who spent 5-10 quid, whatever it was for the ticket, with an email going, we're at home again on Tuesday night, Wednesday night, whatever it was, against Calcer. Come down and watch. We're at home again in 10 days' time. Come and watch. That's where it comes from. That step I think is needed. Just quickly coming back to the 45%, is my question is, what is the figure at the minute? If it's 40%, an increase to 45 isn't easy. Should be really easy. If it's 5%, which is probably where it is, an increase of 40% up to 45 is much bigger challenge. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think if I went to ask the average Man United fan or the average Arsenal fan or Chelsea or Spurs or Liverpool in that WSL of what goes on below the Championship or WSL2, they would have the foggiest. And I think that's really few and far between. And I think that's the crying shame, and that's what needs to be. That is the bit that does need to be worked on. I think you're right, Gareth, about having the stuff on TNT. We had a great away day to Ashford Amateurs. That being, I mean, they had a great time. They got a goal. They celebrated it like they just won the FA Cup, let alone just scored against us. And if that had TV coverage there, it would have been a brilliant show. We battered them. Hands up, we battered them. But it was a cracking atmosphere. It was played in the right spirit. It would have been great TV. My one thing, and I'll pick up with it, is the league needs better communication strategy. It doesn't. It's hit and miss when it's accurate. I'll be honest with you. If you actually once you start to get into it, you'll start spotting mistakes. The Women's Football Chat, hosted by Chris Gadsby, will tell you they'll point out all the mistakes that are made regularly, and it's not just simple mistakes where we know it's some people up on full time. It's the wrong club badge. It's spelling the club names wrong. Simple things that actually should be easily done, but it's also putting out the wrong information at times as well. And when you're having to comment and correct that and get it corrected, it's poorly managed. And I think there's a stronger strategy that's needed from the league as a whole over its whole communication piece.
I think you're right. The question there as well about what is the current percentage, I think, is probably the question of the night. So congratulations on that one. That's very, very good. And again, it's talking about raising the profile of the WNL through innovative storytelling. And it sort of blows your mind a little bit. They're talking about social media in this bit, supporting clubs to become the heart of the communities. And certainly something we're doing at Stevenage is that in the men's programme, that they're going to have the sponsorship details for the women in that as well. So it's a double-edged sword, because the sponsors are getting their name into the men's programme as well as the women's programme. But equally, it means that the visibility is there. So every home game, the Stevenage fans will have the opportunity to see something that is happening within the women's game. And again, it will hopefully help to change some hearts and minds of some of these teams as well. And I think, as you said, the work that Chris Gadsby does, we've had him on the channel before, superb. It requires people to be talking about it regularly. And you're absolutely right. I don't think the average fan will talk much about the WNL because they don't see it. It's not visible to them. And why would they be following people that are specifically about the WNL and below, which is why it's important, I think, for some of the bigger platforms to try and make sure they are including the WNL occasionally as well. The last bit of the strategy, which I'm very pleased to get to, I can't lie, because it's a great conversation, but it has eaten up a lot more time than I thought it might, is this, the commercial side. And it sort of comes in with what you guys were just talking about at the end there as well. Commercial partners for the league specifically as well, a lead partner, some supporting partners to help get some money into the league, so they've got that ability to push it out there, to send it to the teams that are successful and throughout the rest of the WNL as well. So they talk a little bit about that. They talk about these meaningful partnerships and the clubs as well, as I just mentioned, about getting sponsorship and things like that. So they're clearly trying to get people to put more money into the game. But this, thankfully, also segues into one of the headline things that I wanted to talk about, which is, of course, the Women's FA Cup. Now, the Women's FA Cup for me is, you've just mentioned it, Gareth, about it being something that should have that little bit more, that ability to help showcase what is going on in the lower levels. Now, this for me is the absolute key. they haven't changed anything in terms of money, with the exception of introducing the extra preliminary round, the preliminary round beforehand. So rather than now having first round qualifying through to third round qualifying, we've now got that additional one, which won't be televised. And this to me is where, when we start talking about things like commercial activities, this is where it's all, and it's now 9:04, so that's a good thing. It's all arse about face. It really is, because the money is at the big end, the thick end of the wedge is for the two teams that win. It's not spread out enough for people to be able to truly get something out of it unless you are successful in it. And yes, that kind of should be the way about cup competitions. I do understand that. But I've spoken about this a lot. I mentioned it in a previous show as well. The men's FA Cup, I think you get something like 5 million if you win that. There is not a Premier League side alive that is reliant on the FA Cup and winning it in their budget. It's just, they're not. So, considering we're talking about the FA, and this before Joey Barton gets up on his high horse, because he obviously watches every week, before he gets himself all upset, I'm not saying it should be equal pay, equal money for everybody. That's not what I'm talking about. It's the FA, and the FA is football for all. So I actually think that they could equalise the FA Cup across the men's and the women's game. Take the whole pot of money that they're putting into the FA Cup and just go, that's how much money we've got. And I just wonder if a per round bonus would be better. If you win it, you get 20 grand. If you lose, you get 10. So that we start getting to some really transformational money for grassroots football, because the FA Cup is the only one really that provides an avenue for decent money to come into the game. And I say this because you look at that stupid £150 if you lose in the preliminary round. Now, granted, it is all regionalised at this level, but you've still got to go and travel. You've still got to take your club there. You've still got to give. And if you are paying, even if it's just expenses, you're going to pay out more than £150 getting them to go to that. So it doesn't give you anything.
And Barry, just to point out, I believe it's £75 to register for the FA Cup. So you've already spent half of that money before you've even kicked a ball. And then, as you say, if you've got travel expenses, it doesn't. Minibus hire and fuel will go for it. Go on, Barry.
By the time you've paid the registration fee and referees, because they appoint assistants, I believe, even in the preliminary rounds of the FA Cup, you've paid the £150. So, yeah, you even kind of, if you've had to book a coach for whatever reason, I think unlike in the preliminary round, but the 600 I think is fine because you'll get the 450 later on. But if you lose in that preliminary round, you make a loss on playing in the FA Cup.
Yeah, especially, and I think what the big difference between the men's and the women's FA Cup is after costs in the men's, the ticket prices the ticket income is split between the two teams. So you take when Spurs went to Tamworth, after Tamworth had covered all their costs, the gate receipts were split 50-50. I think in the end Spurs gifted Tamworth back theirs, but principal it's split 50-50. And that's why it makes a big, and therefore it can make a big day, even if you go to why a men's team will quite happily go to a bigger Premier League ground, because they know that will get even if the Premier League ground charges £10 an adult and £5 for kids, they know they'll make a good sizable chunk out of it. Women's team doesn't happen like that. And I think the big chunk for me is the uplift in funding or prize money comes once the WSL2 kicks in. Once there's actually prize money for winning the league, and there's prize money, and prize money for TV revenue and things like that already. Because just picking on to just going back a tad to the strategy and the commercial, the big thing for me is the league needs to get a commercial sponsor, because if you get to sort of February time, you're out of the FA Cup, you're out of the League Cup, your season's, you know you're not going to get relegated, you know you're not in a title fight, your season's done, you're going to finish 8th. What have you actually got to play for as a club? You've got nothing to play for, because it doesn't matter whether you finish 10th or second, there is nothing in that for you. So, and so same principle here. It's leads into this whole situation. What frustrates me as well with this is they announced this. This got slipped out. I think it was the day after the homecoming parade. They dropped this. So they had this whole big thing, in front of Buckingham Palace. Aren't we brilliant? Aren't we? We've just won 2 euros on the bounce. By the way, there's no increase in funding for the teams. And on the day of the Euro final, Chelsea, down in tier 6, I believe, tier 5 or tier 6, pulled out the league. Pulled out the league because they couldn't sustain themselves. Whether that be because they couldn't get the players or whatever, but they pulled out. The day England won the Euros, we were losing clubs still. And this is a huge part of why we're losing clubs, because there isn't the financial backing, because they uplifted, when they last did the increase in prize money, they went, oh, here's lots of money for the WSL and Championship teams, and here's a little bit more for you guys down at the bottom end. And it was shameful what the FA did when they did that. And they've never taken the opportunity to rebalance out the prize money at all. I get very crossed by this because it just frustrates. It's unfair. And I know it's impacted teams in the pyramid, either directly or indirectly. And I'll take, as an example, where that impact is. A few seasons ago, Stourbridge had a really good run in the Cup. This was before this big increase, and they got a few grand. The following season, they drew Wolves away. Yeah, when the increase came in, they drew Wolves away. Wolves knocked them out. They got £1.5 grand, and that was their FA Cup run done. And it was pittance, and that's has a huge impact on clubs' financial sustainability. And I'm not using Stourbridge as an example for the fixtures, not because of the financial issues, but that's the principle of it all.
So why don't they change it, Gareth? Why is it still? I mean, we talk about not wanting to compare the men's game and the women's game, but it's hitting that point already where the biggest chunk of money is still being pushed towards what is already established. The WSL is established. People know about it. It exists. We know it exists because Joey Barton whinges about it every week. So we know it's there. The WSL2 exists. People are aware of it. Is it as popular? Not yet, but people are very aware of it. But it's just going to become an island if it doesn't have the support network below. And, one of the big gripes of these people is that they want to say that women's teams need to be more self-sustainable. And that comes from the FA, the ability for them to help these clubs out. So why don't they? I mean, you're on a board of directors now and all of that sort of thing. So I don't expect you to come out here and absolutely wallop the FA. But looking at your club with Insure, if you knew that you were going to get I didn't do the maths when I came out with 20 grand and 10 grand. I'm sure that's probably too much. But still the sole idea that in the earlier rounds, you don't need it at the top level. You really don't, even for the WSL sides. And I just feel like if they're coming in the fourth round, how many rounds are there after that? They're coming in the fourth, so they can play the fourth, fifth, quarters, semis, and the finals. That's fine. So they could get themselves like 100 grand or whatever. You can uplift it a little bit as you go up. I get that they need to have more money for it because there's more costs. But why don't they? Why don't they change it? Because it would, if you just flipped it round, it would solve so many problems for the teams down the bottom because they'd know their season is paid for within that budget and everything else is a bonus. Whereas at the moment, the FA Cup is the bonus while they're scrabbling around for the money from elsewhere.
Yeah. So when most teams will when they figure out their budgets, will budget to lose in the first round they enter. Because if you budget to lose in the first round you enter, then everything you get afterwards is a bonus. But it is really tricky. And as teams progress up the pyramid as well, they need an even better. I mean, and you should be in a position where you can potentially go further in the cup because you can have a stronger squad, etc. But to use Wythenshawe as an example, last year we went in, I believe, second qualifying round, first qualifying round, one of those two. I can't remember exactly which one. This year we go in, I believe, at the third qualifying round, and so this makes the assumption that we would win the second qualifying round. We now need to go an extra round further than last year. Last year we got to the first round. We would need to make it to the second round this year in order to make the same money we made last year, get into the first round. So we're kind of looking at the FA Cup thinking, I just want a winnable tie, because then we can win the games, and let's kind of have a couple of winnable ties, and then when, if touch wood we make it through those, I think if I think about Mancunian Unity from last year, had a great run, beat Leeds, beat Stockport, etc. Clubs from tiers above. That's fantastic. The year before, I think they got beaten by Newcastle, or someone in a lower regional league got beaten by Newcastle. I think it was Unity.
It was Unity.
So some fantastic runs for them. Those are the kind of things that then mean that they can build on that the next season. They can build on it for the season after. So, I just think that so many clubs rely on the FA Cup money, because the only other form of prize money you can get is from the League Cup in the WNL, and that's not going to be a lot. That might be a nice kind of token, but it's not going to change a season or kind of fund any real significant change with the clubs. So I think it's tricky. I think the argument that people will come up with is Emirates are paying a hell of a lot more in terms of sponsorship to sponsor the men's FA Cup than Adobe are in terms of the women's FA Cup. My counter to that would be the FA should sell them as a package, and you sponsor the FA Cups, and then you can kind of do a more equal distribution, or not even necessarily equal distribution, but just a better distribution of that prize money.
Well, Lewis had their whole equal game campaign, didn't they, a few seasons ago, where they sort of said about better distribution of the funding, and I think there's conversation that had to be had there about it, how they did that, and I think that meant more funding for the lower league men teams as well. And I think that's huge, and I think that would be hugely beneficial as well, because take the Tamworth situation. Obviously, they did really well this season, but this last season, but they won't do that again next season or this coming FA Cup run. Unlikely. Good luck to them if they do, and I wish them all the best. But therefore, a better distribution of the funding would have helped sustain them through even further. And let's be honest, the Wolves, the Man Uniteds, the Liverpool men's teams don't need huge money. They make more, in a league position in the Premier League than they do in the FA Cup for most of them. I think even if you win the FA Cup, you make more, depending on for being one position higher in the league than you do from winning the FA Cup final in the men's game. So realistically, the FA Cup as a collective, the prize money is better spent as a collective on the women's game and the lower league men's game as a whole. And I think that's the way forward in it. I'm with you, Gareth. I think the collective sort of sponsorship of it is the way forward. I think that needs to be, the FA needs to sort of balance out. I think personally, the reason why we've got this sort of disparity in the women's game is because they're trying to keep the big clubs in the WSL on board, whilst before they went into the separate, the league structures that will keep them, sort of.
I've always argued
on the hook for that.
I've always argued that on the men's FA Cup, if they want to make sure if they were going to take the money out of it, the easy way to make sure it is absolutely still viable as a competition is to give one of the Champions League spots to the team that wins the FA Cup. Take away the people that finish fourth, give it to some actual champions. I'll tell you what, teams would soon be playing for that, wouldn't they? So, right, the last little bit that we said we were going to talk about, we're going to hand over to Gareth for this one, for our final little part, which is quite simply this. It's changed I nearly called it the WSL Cup there. That would have been a very different thing. The WNL Cup and Plate. There's a few changes that have happened with that. And this year, thanks to the little changes that are going to be happening. Remember, in the WSL, there is no relegation for definite, because WSL2 will promote 2 clubs, and then the team that finishes third will play off against the team that finishes bottom in the WSL. And of course, if the WSL team loses, they drop. If they don't, then they'll get reprieve for a year, which I've got to be honest, is a level of jeopardy that I think I might enjoy probably more than I probably should. But I am a sadistic man occasionally when it comes to watching the pain of other football teams. So there we are. But that's going to happen. As a result, that will obviously leave potentially, well, not potentially, it will leave 2 spaces in the WSL2, which you would assume would then be taken by just the 2 teams that win as normal. But then there's no relegation unless they do the same thing with the WNL North and South and the team that finished bottom in the WSL2. So tell us a bit more, Gaza, about what it's going to be like having playoffs and cups and plates changing in terms of WNL.
So with the playoffs, it's a one-off, so it's only for this season whilst the WSL changes kind of the numbers. But in order to fill the extra space that will be left in the WSL2, there'll be a playoff between the second place team in the Northern Premier Division and the second place team in the Southern Premier Division. So there will be a third team promoted then. Then in order to fill the spaces left in the Premier Divisions, there will be 2 sets of playoffs in the Division 1 National League. So the Division 1 North runners-up will play the runners-up from the Division 1 Midlands, and the Division 1 Southeast will play the runners-up from the Division 1 Southwest in order for promotion. Now, as a promoted club, this is hugely exciting when you look at what Cheadle did last year in the Division 1 North. Cheadle last year came second on goal difference, and if there was that potential for Cheadle then to go and have that playoff and go straight up, then that would have been huge for them. Even as a one-off game, if the WNL market this properly, then as like a one-off big game, big gates, I think lots of neutrals would be interested. If it's local, hopefully Wythenshawe won't be there because hopefully we'll have won the league. But if it's around and local as a neutral, I'm going to go because I think it's a really, really kind of big event. Obviously, we know Wolves last year didn't necessarily apply for promotion, but if they had and this playoff was there, then Wolves would have been in with that shout of promotion as well. So I think that this is a really exciting addition. I think sometimes you can see where things are going. Like I think, it kind of felt for a while like Forest were the most likely winners. It kind of ended up splitting off then into a race maybe to kind of just put pressure on them and hope they slip up. But if there was something there to play for second place, then the whole title race becomes way more interesting for everybody. It may have meant then as well in Division 1 North, the teams like Leeds and Huddersfield that were putting pressure on. There's still something that's within grasp towards the end. There's still something to go for. So that's hugely interesting. The other big change is with the WNL Cup. So last year, there was a determining round at the start where if you won, you would go into the cup, and if you lost, you would go into the plate, and the PGA teams were playing in the plate. This year, it's slightly different, well, very different, in that we now have a group stage. There are 22 groups, so it goes all the way from Group A to Group V. And the way that this works is the 22 group winners, along with the 10 best second place teams, will go into the cup. Then you've got the other 12 runners up, plus the 20 best third place teams will go into the plate. So if you finish fourth, you're eliminated. If you finish third, you've got a pretty strong chance of going into the plate. Finish first, into the cup, and then second, it depends whereabouts you fall. The PGA clubs are just in the groups. They're just in the groups as they are. And wherever they finish will determine. Am I wrong?
No, you're right, mate. I'm just frustrated about the PGA. So sorry, I shouldn't be shaking my head at that point. I was just getting frustrated by PGA.
Okay.
So no, you're spot on, mate. Spot on. No, you got it spot. I was shouting if you're wrong. Don't worry.
And I'm really torn with the PGA things. I think, from my own personal opinion, is I really don't like it. With my Wythenshawe hat on, knowing that we can market our first home game of the season is against Manchester United PGA, but we'll say that a bit quietly. Knowing that we can put media out there that shows that it's Wythenshawe and the Manchester United badge, and hopefully get a kind of good sized crowd for a midweek game. I'm hoping there's a financial benefit to this for us. That being said, however, I suspect the financial benefit is more likely to come from Wolves and Stoke, who are also in the group, than it will from Manchester United. I think, looking at this at the moment, it's Wolves that are going to come up to us. It's a bit of a free hit for us, really, because United PGA got to the semi-final of the Plate last season. Wolves finished second in the Northern Premier Division. Stoke finished third. So I don't think we could have got a tougher group at all. I think we look at it and think, let's just go for it. Let's just go for it and let's see what happens. And let's properly test ourselves against the best teams that we could possibly come up against, and see what happens. But they are 3 really exciting fixtures for us for our calendar. And if it goes well and we manage to get some results, then that's absolutely incredible. If not, then hopefully we've had a good crowd at the United game, although it is midweek, and hopefully Wolves bring quite a few up. Hopefully our lot will come down and we can kind of really push that as come and watch us against the absolute best teams that the National League has to offer, and let's see if we can test ourselves against them. I can also see that, what I think this is, again, potentially tinfoil hat, is a trial run at the reaction to PGA teams playing more games, and also a trial run at expansion. So looking at the PGA teams, I think we can to look at United and think that one's okay, but then it's Wolves and Stoke that I think will be the tricky ones. And actually, to be honest, they're the games I'm looking forward to more. I think this is the league looking at this and going, we want to expand the number of teams in our divisions. Let's use a group stage as a way of adding in an extra 2 games into the calendar. Let's see how it works, and then go from there. But even though it's a little bit complicated in terms of how you progress, I think there is definitely potential for it to be interesting. But there's also, I can see also why the PGA teams there I'm not thrilled by. Unless we get loads of people come through the gate and we make a lot of money next Thursday, then I might change my mind.
I think, I'll be honest with you, Gareth. I think as long as Man United women aren't playing, I think you'll get a good turnout, because we all know that some of the Man United women faithful, they're loud and proud, and they will come and travel. And we saw that when they came down to New Bucks Head. We get them at home on the 7th of September, the day the WSL season kicks off. So we won't have many of them there. So swings and roundabouts on that. Personally, I think it's all about sporting integrity with having the PGAs in it. It's the FA Women's National League Cup and Plate. They're not FA Women's National League teams. Full stop, end of story for me. And that's before we even get into any of the rest of it. I think the FA are trying to soften up teams to the expansion. What annoys me is actually if they part the PGA teams from their conversation previously, their strategy previously for the expansion, and actually brought teams up from the regional leagues, etc., it would have been a much better competition in the long run. Personally, I'd like to see the runners-up of Tier 5 entered into the if you're going to do it to anybody in, I would put the runners-up of Tier 5 into the competition, because actually they're the teams that are looking to be in the FA Women's National League, to give them a taste of what it's like. They might well not progress far, but at least they'll have had that experience. What I do think is the group stage gives every club a minimum of one extra game at the part of the season where pitches are available and they can be used. My issue is it therefore becomes very congested. August, September, October becomes very congested, and then you get into proper cup season in November, December time, and then there's very little action in the new year. And what you'll see this, Gareth, is you get into March and April, and you'll have 2 games a month, and if you're lucky, one of those will be at home, and you could be quite easily have none at home, and therefore you go a whole month with no games, having had this really congested period, not helped by having this group stage now. I like the principle of the group stage. I think it's not a bad idea. I just don't want the PGAs in it, full stop. I'll die on that hill. And I think you're right. I think you have got the toughest group. And I wish Women's all the best, bar when we come up to you on, I'm trying to remember what day it is now. It's I've got the calendar in front of me.
28th of September, I think.
I was going to say back end of September, isn't it? Yeah. I hope we absolutely batter you. That's my unpartisan hat on.
That's fine. The feeling is absolutely mutual.
On the flip side, I hope you batter Man United, and I hope you batter Stoke. So there you go. So you finish second in the group. In all honesty, I think you're hitting. I genuinely think you might actually have a good chance against Man United, PJ, simply because it's early stage to their pre-season. They'll be seeing the games against the FA Women's National League teams. Certainly yourselves, to an extent, us less so Stoke, because they play Stoke last, as pre-season warm-up friendlies. And let's remember, the PGAs were in last season. They ended up pulling out of games last season because their players were committed elsewhere. I think it was Arsenal's players were all away on international duty with England. I think Sheffield United couldn't field the team at one point. Don't quote me on these exactly, but certainly these were teams that were pulling out. And I think that's because they couldn't field it. And I think you'll start to see if some of those teams, I'll use Sheffield United as the example, but the sort of the smaller WSL2 teams in terms of setup, if they haven't got the number of players, therefore they will struggle to field teams, and therefore they might well be that actually they don't progress. And I think therefore there'll be some interesting upsets. And I do think it could well be interesting lessons learned. And I genuinely believe that it doesn't. The FA's sort of aspiration, or the reason why the FA were pushing for PGAs supposedly, is to help develop the England team. And I genuinely don't think it works. I think the better way for developing the England team is expand the leagues, to give have more teams playing more games, and therefore have players distribute. We've seen that with Frank Kirby, Beth England going off, leaving Chelsea to gain the minutes. Do the same across the board, and I think you'll find they'll become more competitive. And I think that's the way forward.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways. Sorry, Barry. One of the ways as well to develop players for the England team is the FA was so kind of forthcoming with, look at these grassroots clubs that these players all came from, had them all coming out to warm up. I live in Liverpool, and there was a couple, Ellertoon from Astley and Tilsley. There's a couple of, I think Grace Clinton was wearing an old Zavarian shirt, and there's all of these clubs. If actually that you give the time and space and funding to these lower clubs lower down the pyramid, there's more money there that they can get through FA Cup prize money. They're more likely to be able to kind of develop these players that, probably may move on and join a PGA later on, but that will then keep a natural progression for the women's team in the future as well.
So I don't think FA Cup money should be going to Villarreal.
No, maybe not Villarreal.
No, I think it makes sense. And as we mentioned there, potentially a bit more loaning, seeing the loan system being used a bit more. Generally, WSL clubs will only loan to WSL2. They don't generally tend to put them anywhere else. But these PGA clubs, they could well see those kids go out on loan maybe a little bit more as well. They are under 21 though, so is it a bit of a sort of travel thing and the fact that, I don't know how much they get paid in the WSL academies. So there's a lot of questions to be asked, I think, on that one. But it does sound, I think, a little bit more exciting. And there's a guy who consistently whinging about the bloody Subway League Cup and how that is just so repetitive and boring and dull and needs a bit of an injection. I think 100% there's been a good bit of injection into WNL. And listen, the fact we've been able to talk about it for 90 minutes, the entirety of an entire match, should give you enough knowledge to know that it absolutely is going to be a hell of a season and something I personally can't wait for. Claire was asked the question, do we think any more clubs will fold? I mean, the sad news is probably the way that women's football is at the moment, somebody somewhere will probably not see out the season. But the question is going to be where, what sort of level will it be? Will it be one of those at tier 6 that nobody ever really hears too much about? Or will it be one of those in tier 3 or even tier 2 that decides they're just not going to support the women's team anymore? I think if you want to talk a little bit more about that, next week on Monday, we are hoping to have our conversation all around everything that's going on at the moment with Barcelona and just the general state of the women's game in terms of what these football clubs need to be doing. Do they need to have a little bit more ownership? Who knows? We'll have that chat on Monday. So do come back and see us then. And equally, Jonathan, if you're still around, thank you for watching it twice. It always adds to the views. The European competition is a little bit mad. We've tried our best. I'll put it back out there again. It's on TikTok and on Twitter in a beautiful extended version of the PowerPoint. So hopefully you all understood it, but do feel free to have a watch over that if your mind is racing, because if we think the WNL Plate and Cup sounds a little bit intriguing to get through, it's got nothing on the Women's Champions League and the Europa Cup. My thanks to both of you again for being here. Nick, as we don't have you here all that often, please do give a little shout out for where people could see more of you should they wish to.
Oh, seeing, maybe not quite seeing. I'm not. My beautiful features very rarely come out, but otherwise you can hear my dulcet tones on the Wolves Women podcast, which is at Wolves Women Pod on all your favourite social media platforms, and you can find the pod on all your listening platforms as well. I also do occasionally do a bit of writing for Since 71 as well, so you can find my thoughts around Wolves on there and other things FA Women's National League. So do give us a follow on all, and do give us a listen.
Excellent. Well, there we go. Somewhere you can find Nick, and of course Gareth. If you want to find him, he'll be here hopefully next week, having the same old conversations that we always do. John Foster should be back at some point as well. It won't be next week because he's off at one of his 7 million clubs that he supports, so we shan't be seeing him next week. And hopefully as well, Stu Barker. It was a later show today. We are thinking of taking Lower League Lingo a little bit later. It'll be Lower League Lingo live and late. So we're going to add an extra L to it to allow Stu to be able to attend a few more times. So that is something that we are really looking forward to doing. Claire, congratulations again to Fulham for making it up into the WNL. Hopefully Stevenage will be joining you next year. Thanks for being in with the chat. It's so much more enjoyable when we have you guys talking along with us as well. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Nick. We'll be back next week with another Lower League Lingo. And on Monday, my God, guys, the season's back. Ain't it bloody good?